So for those of you joining us from home, welcome as well. Thank you for being there. Caleb sent out an email to you earlier. If you didn't see it, you can look for it now as you're watching. It just indicates some instructions to you that when I finish the lecture and we enter the Q&A time, if you're at home and you want to share a question, you can do that in the chat on the live feed on the YouTube site. If you're here in the audience, we're going to move this microphone out a little bit. But if you have a question from the floor tonight, we're going to ask you to come speak into the microphone for everyone's benefit in the room. I know that makes some of you nervous, but you don't have to get that close to that microphone. It'll pick you up. Just come get near it, and that will be enough. And then the people at home will be able to hear you as well. All right? And they'll appreciate that. So we'll begin tonight. The aim of tonight's lecture will be to firmly see three possible relationships of the state and the church. And then from this observation to appreciate why a separation of church and state is a more biblical position and yet requires more work from us, from the church, in its spiritual labor, the spiritual labor to which we're called. So let's begin tonight with some foundational premises. In the Bible, there are two kingdoms, and they seem to be at odds with one another. Just consider the second petition of the Lord's Prayer, if you will. Thy kingdom come, right? There seems to be a kingdom of this world and a kingdom of God. Paul reminded us in Philippians 3:20 that we are citizens of the kingdom of heaven. Though we are called to live in the kingdom of this world is not our homeland. We must live here as exiles, journeying to our true home, a kingdom that is making its presence known through the gospel. As a separate discussion, right, so you hold that first one, two kingdoms, kingdom of heaven, kingdom of the world. A separate discussion, the reformers, they would speak of two kingdoms with a reference to the role of the state and the role of the church. According to their view, there is a separation of powers, but not always a separation of spheres. There would be an overlap of some responsibility between the church and the state, especially relating to church discipline. The state exercised authority in the civil realm. The civil government was given power by God to govern a people, and it was given the power of the sword to do so. We find all that language in Romans 13. The church, on the other hand, had been given what were called the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And that really is a reference to our first use of two kingdoms, the kingdom of God, in breaking. The church is the representative of that kingdom here on earth. So it has, as its power, the keys, while the state has the sword. With that said, there are three possibilities for how the church and the state relate to one another. First, a nation might be a church state, like the Vatican, or even like Islam. Islam is a church state or a religious state. A second iteration of this relationship is to have a state church, a church state or a state church. Anglicanism, which has been a big part of our history study we've been doing, is a positive example of that, or at least became a positive example of that, as to how a church and a state can coexist with overlapping spheres of authority. A negative example of a state church would be Nazi-era Lutheranism. One of the people we prize the most is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a leader within that church and left it and helped to start a new denomination of Lutherans, even a new seminary, because of his opposition to Hitler. And then finally, a third position, a position of separation of the church and state. And there are different forms of that as well. On one extreme end, a negative extreme, you have that a hostile separation like communist China or ancient Rome. Or you might have a more positive example of a separation where there's a friendly, or intends to be a friendly relationship like that conceived in the United States. All right. In the medieval background, the Middle Ages, from 325 AD, which is Constantine, that's the Council of Nicaea. Constantine was the emperor of Rome who led to a kind of, it's a very important phrase, a kind of Christianizing of the Roman world at the time, okay? And so from that period, 325, until the fall of a city with his name, Constantinople, in 1453, that massive swath of history we call the Middle Ages for a crazy reason, because it falls in the middle, in between the ancient period and the modern period. It's just that simple, and it's just that meaningless. But in that period, we also call it the medieval period, which is an archaic word for middle, there was a consensus of how the church and the state related. They saw them as being wedded. No one could conceive of a separation. And so the time of Henry VIII, who sort of begins our story, 1509 he begins his reign, no one had envisioned that there even could be such a thing as a separation. Religion was such an important part of the moral order of a city, and ministers were some of the most educated leaders in the society, that it just made sense that religious leaders partnered with the civil leaders in the governance of nations. Yet this idea is very foreign to us. Don't you agree? It is very foreign to us. So just to offer to you how foreign it is, you don't say, how foreign is it, because it's not a joke. There's a phrase I offer to you, magisterial reformers. If you've been hanging around the Reformed community, Reformed churches for a very long period of time, I dare say that you've encountered this phrase. Yet I submit to you that I rarely hear it used correctly, even among educated people. I've heard seminary professors use it incorrectly. I've heard people that you know in pulpits around this country use it incorrectly. Most of the time, magisterial reformers, when you hear it, it's being used by the person saying it as a positive accolade. It kind of has the connotation that the reformers were majestic or wonderful. But that's not what it means at all. It simply refers, the word magisterial refers to the magistrate or the governor. Magisterial reformers are those reformers who were supported financially and militarily by the local government or magistrate. In fact, most of the Reformation works would not have been successful without the approval and the protection of the civil authorities. Just consider Frederick the Wise in Germany. He granted protection to Luther. Luther was being hunted down by the Roman Catholic Church, and Frederick protected him. He was a very powerful prince in Germany, and Luther was protected in one of his castles for a very long period of time, long enough for him to get the Bible translated and the Reformation thoroughly underway in Germany. So the question arises from these observations: how did we get from this late medieval consensus on the union of the church and state to the modern Western conviction of separation? And what are the consequences? So I'm going to tell you a little story. I did my best to provide you. I'm not sure if I picked them up. Maybe the passer-outers were able to assist you. I gave you a list tonight of the kings and queens of England. I appreciate the ability to wax eloquently off all of those names, but if you've never encountered them, you need that list to be able to put tonight's conversation into context. I'm not going to talk about each one of those guys. I'm really going to just talk about King Henry for a brief bit here. But I'm going to make connections. I'm going to make an observation about the whole list. So it's good if you can kind of observe it and see that there's a pattern. Roman Catholic, Protestant. Roman Catholic, Protestant. Roman Catholic, Protestant. Just in that order. So our story begins with King Henry. He is the very important point of demarcation. And I've supplied you with that chart. Okay? So I have two observations to make. The first is Henry unintentionally launched the Reformation on political grounds. The second observation I want to make, his separation from Rome had the opposite effect he desired. He was really looking to stabilize his reign, but in fact what he did was he created political unrest for the next 150 years and created a destabilization of the nation that would lead to the Civil War. But it would also lead to the American Revolution. Now, that's put a lot of weight on Henry, but let's hear the story. His unintentional reformation was born out of a concern for an heir. He needed a male heir in his mind. And when he was 17 years old, in 1509, he came to the throne of England. And his father had negotiated an arranged marriage for him with Catherine of Aragon. She is the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. So this is a very powerful family, but not very nice people. And they are staunchly Roman Catholic. Okay? The negotiation was first made with Henry's older brother. Henry was not first in line to go to the throne. He had a brother. Get this, his name was Arthur. So you know Henry VII had some Camelot ideas about who his sons were going to be.